So in today's video, I'm going to be walking you through the step-by-step process for creating high quality listing pages for your directory. I'm going to start off by showing you how to build these pages inside of Webflow. Then I'm going to show you how to set up the Webflow CMS so that you can create tons and tons of these pages. Then I'm going to show you how to configure your Airtable backend. And I'm also going to show you how you can then use Whalesync to sync data between Airtable and Webflow. And then I'm going to show you a workflow that I use to find data that populates my listing page with high quality information with a make.com workflow. This and more, let's get into it. Friends, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be going deep into a very important use case for building directory businesses, and that's creating high quality listing pages. Now, if you're a little bit in a rush, the key steps I kind of mentioned in my intro, we're going to be going through the process of, figuring out what it is that we need to build, getting it into Webflow, then setting up the CMS so that we can create dynamic template pages. Then we're going to go ahead, we're going to use Airtable and Whalesync to basically sync the data between our database tool and the Webflow CMS. And then I'm also going to show you some tricks and workflows that will allow you to basically populate your database with high quality content. So people have been asking me if I can, get into the weeds a little bit more. So if you're looking at the length of this video and it seems a bit long, it's because we really do go in depth here. Now, before we get into it, I have a few little shout outs to make. The first one is the sponsor of this video, Whalesync. So Whalesync has kindly sponsored the last few videos. And in case you don't know what Whalesync is, it's the tool that I use to basically make sure that my Airtable database and my Webflow CMS stay in sync at all times. Now, there are other automation tools out there like make.com, Zapier, whatever it is that you want to use. But when it comes to the use case of syncing Webflow and Airtable to each other, it's as simple as it gets. Okay, so all I'm saying is that if you are going to have that connection, this here will just cause significantly less headaches. I'm going to be talking more about how I use Whalesync in this actual tutorial. I've got an entire section where I'm going to show you how we get our data from our Airtable database into Webflow and vice versa. And of course I use Whalesync for this. But one more thing that I wanted to mention about Whalesync is that usually I just use the Airtable and Webflow setup, but more recently I've been experimenting with some new tools. And so I've got some content on this coming in the future, but I've basically been having a play around with a few little apps that use a Supabase database. And so what I did was I set up a Supabase backend, and then I basically created my little admin portal inside of Airtable. And with Whalesync, what I can actually do is sync the data back and forth. And so if you end up wanting to build like little apps for, who knows what, but you don't want to have to configure like an entire admin portal, then having a little connection like this works incredibly well. Again, thank you so much to the Whalesync team for sponsoring this video. And now let's get into the next shout out. Now, as some of you maybe know, over the last few weeks, I've been working on a course on how to build a local directory, and it's kind of been in testing. And throughout the testing phase, I had a handful of people who actually went through the process of trying to build their first directory, and we have the first directory that got published. And so that's what I want to show you today. So the directory is called tattoo-friendly-onzins.com, and it was created by this guy called Matt. Prior to this, Matt had not built a website, had not set up any automations and workflows, and within 29 days, he managed to build his MVP. And basically, this is what it looks like. So he's got basically a directory where you can find onzins and basically places that you can visit in Japan that are tattoo friendly, and you can kind of jump in here. You can kind of see what ones are available. He's got all of his search and filtering all sorted out, with, information that I suppose people need. And then you can kind of click into it. You can kind of see what's going on. And then at the moment you click on visit the website and it'll kind of take you to the booking page there. And so all of this from scratch within 29 days. It's started indexing on Google. I think it's only a week in. But if you've ever wondered how hard or how easy it is to build these sites, Matt does not come from a technical background. He is probably starting at the same starting point as a lot of you are. And so if you ever kind of wanted to see a use case of someone setting something like this up from scratch, this is it. That brings me to the local directory playbook. There is an update on it. In the last few videos, I basically said we're in waitlist mode. We are no longer in waitlist mode. You can now sign up. You can now start working on your directory if that is what you want to do. Quick little rundown. There will be two options available. There's the do-it-yourself version where you can basically join my community, the MVMP Labs, where you'll basically get access to this course and all of the other courses that I put on there. I've got things on, say, like Stripe and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And then you can just go through the step-by-step process of building it all out yourself. Or option two, if you kind of want to get a little bit of a head start, there's also the option where we're going to basically pre-build your directory templates. So instead of you getting the generic templates that you'll get in here, we'll basically jump on a call with you, figure out what your use case is, and then from there, basically build out your Webflow structure, build out your Airtable database, set up some of your syncing workflows, set up some of your automation, just so that your starting point is way further down the track. And this here is something that we're gonna be experimenting with just to see how it goes. But because I actually have people working on this, we can only take so many at a time at the moment. So if that is of interest to you, just smash on this button here. It will take you to my booking page, and then we can jump on a call and have a chat about your use case. Now, just to really bring that sale home, let me also give you a quick little behind the scenes of the MVMP Labs and specifically this course. So you'll get access to this little portal. I've basically broken down the entire directory build into multiple stages. The people that I wanted to create this for are people who don't come from a technical background. So maybe people who've never used tools like Webflow, Airtable, Make.com, Whalesync, all those kind of things. And the idea is that you go through each stage step by step. So at the moment, all this is unlocked, but the idea is that you go through the process. You'll start off by building out your directory landing page. I'll kind of explain how to do that with tools like Webflow and Reloom. Then you'll dive into some, keyword research, competitor analysis type things, where we'll dive into tools like Airtable and Make.com, and we'll also set up, workflows with the ChatGPT integration, Perplexity, a whole bunch of fun things like that. And then we really get into the MVP build. So the first one is going to be to go over, say, your listing pages. That's actually what I'm going to be covering in today's video. Then we've got pillar pages and so on. And this just keeps going. There'll be a whole bunch of assets that you can use in here. So for example, I'm going to be sharing with you Make.com blueprints that you can copy and paste. There'll be like Airtable scripts that you can use. And basically, I'll give you what I think you need in order to really get the most out of it. One more thing that we're doing at the moment that's been quite fun is we do group calls. So each week we kind of get together and we kind of go over different things that need to be covered. Last week we talked about, just strategies for finding your first few customers. We also talked about, how to create social media content on Autopilot. We went over some other directories and stuff like that. And so really, these calls are there to basically make you hang out with me, get answers to questions, that kind of stuff. If there are any questions about it, feel free to reach out. But with that being said, we've got quite a bit to cover in this video. We're going to be dealing with the listing pages. So I hope you enjoy it. If there are any questions along the way, let me know in the comment section down below. Other than that, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing that we would need to do before even starting the build of our listing page is to think about what makes a good listing page. And so typically what I like to do at the very beginning of it all is kind of get inspiration for setting up, certain kind of pages. And when it comes to building out listing pages, I typically go check out marketplace websites, I check out directory websites. And one of the pages that really just nails the user experience and the content is Airbnb. And so right now we're on a listing page or a hosting page on Airbnb. And they really do a great job kind of illustrating what's important. And for me, there are a few key things that I'd want to point out here. The first thing is the imagery. So what I've learned is if your listing pages have high quality images, it actually makes a huge difference in terms of the first impression that you'll make with people visiting this particular landing page. Ultimately, the goal of these pages is to drive a certain type of action. So in the case of Airbnb, it's to get someone to book a stay at one of these places. If you have a talent directory, it might be to fill out a contact form. If it's a product directory, it might be to click on the buy button. The key thing is that everything that sits on this page is there to support you in helping your website visitor make that decision. And so images, great first starting point. The second thing is you need to really think about what are the key questions that a website visitor would have about qualifying this particular listing as something that works best for them. And so one of the things that Airbnb does at the very, very top is they answer what I think is the most important question, which is how many people can stay at this place. And so you're going to need to think about your use case and think about if there's one question that your customers would have, what is that question? What is the main question you need to answer, and put that at the very top. And so you can see here that, Airbnb really dives into saying, hey, look, we've got room for 4 guests, 2 bedrooms, 3 beds, 1 bath. It basically tells people, hey, is this right for me or is this not right for me? Now, beyond that, what Airbnb does really well is they break down the sections in the most effective way that I kind of seen on any kind of site. The first thing is on the left side, you've got all of your content. Now, your content is quite long, but what this content does on all of these different pages is it addresses the main hesitations, objections, and questions that someone might have. And then on the right side, we have the main call to action. So this is where the actual conversion ends up happening. So in this case, it's book now. Okay. And so as we're scrolling down this entire thing, you can kind of see that the call to action stays in place at all times, so that whenever someone is ready to make that decision, that it's positioned in a way that's easily accessed. They don't have to scroll through the entire page in order to find things. Now, what kind of sections will you typically find on a listing page? Now, typically you'll have things like social proof. So this is what this banner is up here. How many reviews there've been, how many, what their rating is. Then you also have kind of a highlight section. So, hey, what is like one of the main highlights about this particular place? So it might be something like, hey, you have your very own spa. You might have some form of long form content, like an about section. That answers kind of like the little in-between questions like, hey, are pets allowed, that kind of stuff. And then you have a section on amenities. You might have, like a calendar with availability and so on. And so what we're doing here is we're kind of thinking about the customer and the questions that they have right in this moment, and we're proactively answering those questions. And you really want to think about your directory listing page in the exact same way. If I wanted someone to pull the trigger on my listing page now, what information would I need to give them in order for them to make that decision? Now, obviously, Airbnb has been around for a while. The way I like to approach this is focus on maybe 2 to 3 of the most important content blocks as a starting point, and then build on that in the future. With that in mind, let's dive straight into the first part of the build, which is to set up our template listing page. Now, the project I'm going to be working on in this video is the next video from my previous video where I basically showed you how to create high quality pillar pages. Now we're going to create the listing pages. Now, in case you didn't watch that previous video, I use Reloom components and I use the Reloom style guide in order to create these pages very fast. I'd encourage you to check that out because that will add a lot more context to what I'm about to show you next. Now, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create essentially a template page where we can dynamically generate all of our different listing pages. Now, before I dive into creating the templated version of this, what I like to do is I actually like to start off by creating the static version of the page so I get a really good understanding of what it is that I'm actually going to need to make dynamic. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to create a new page, and we're going to call this page our race listing page. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this page, and I'm now going to start with the actual build process. Now, the first thing is, as you know, I use Reloom components. Reloom has a whole bunch of amazing components that you can use to quickly build your sections and your basically skeleton of your pages. One of the things that I did notice though is that, for this particular use case of say something like a listing page, I oftentimes had to glue different pieces together. So what I ended up doing is actually just creating my own component that I can just copy and paste in whenever I'm working on directories or marketplace businesses. And so I'm going to use that in just a second. But the first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to set up the page structure. And the way that I do that is just by using the Reloom library or the Reloom app extension, and then I can just paste it in here. And what this will do is just at a high level, ensure that I am following best practices when it comes to setting up scalable versions of this page. This is something that I'm not going to dive into too much detail just for the sake of all of it, but I just still wanted to show you that if you are going to use Reloom components, this is what I recommend doing. Now on every page, what I'm going to do before I start adding all of my components is just also adding, some of the reusable components that I'll have on other pages. That includes things like my nav bar, it includes things like my footer. And so typically I'll just put them into the right position and then we can dive straight into the build. Now, what are we going to have to do? So inside of our main wrapper is where all of the content is going to sit for our listing page. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to head over to the Reloom component library and I'm going to get my template that I set up, and I am simply going to jump back into Webflow and I'm going to paste it in here. So now that I have this in here, I kind of have the skeleton of my listing page. I've got my breadcrumbs, I've got my images that I'm going to be able to use, I have my listing title, I have my about section, I've kind of got like a why choose us type of section, then I've got kind of like a quick overview meta description section, I've got a map, and I've got a frequently asked questions section. Now, one of the things that I like to do, or how I like to approach this, is to just kind of think of it content block by content block, and then over time just make adjustments to it. So I know full well that all I really need to do is get 2 to 3 high quality content sections, then I'm pretty much ready to ship it. But then over time, as more questions come up, as I'm creating more content on the site, I'll actually be able to just expand on this particular setup by just adding a new content section every single time. And that's what makes this particular setup really, really scalable. So you can see here, I've got just a listing page content section. And then if I ever wanted to add a new section, I can just, either jump into Reloom, grab myself a component, paste it in here, or I can even just build my own custom one. Now, this is what I'm going to use to get started. And as soon as you're at this stage, what I'd recommend doing is actually just starting out by creating all of the copy for a sample listing on your page and then adding it here. Okay, so this is kind of what I came up with content-wise as a starting point. We've got our breadcrumb, which will be important for SEO later on and just for general navigation. Then I've got my gallery images. Then I've got my content. And so really, the reason why I like to start off with the content is because if you can make the content look good without any of the visual support, if you can make it informative, then adding a nice visual kind of look to it over time will just make things even better. Now, as I said in the previous step, there are so many additional things that I'd want to add to this page, but the key is to really just keep it simple and move fast. For the sake of this example, I also chose my call to action be to just register for the race. So if I were thinking about, okay, how can I add value to the people listing my site, it would probably be the key thing that they're going towards, which is to get more race signups. Now, this is kind of what it looks like now. The next part in all of this is going to now be making, certain visual upgrades to it, making a few little changes here, but more importantly, to start adding image assets so that you can kind of get a little bit of an idea of, what kind of images you're going to need. Okay, so I've added some of the images. I basically turned this into dark mode. A few quick little notes on selecting images. Now, if you want, use placeholder images. That's what I've done here. But one of the things that is going to be important is to figure out how you're going to get your hand on these images going forward. So typically what I like to do is to also account for the fact that I might not get images. So one of the things that you can do to just kind of see what it will look like without images is to just add something like display none to your gallery section. And then you can just hide it, and then you'll kind of see, all right, is this still the way I want it to look? And I basically came to the conclusion, yep, even if I don't get images, this page is at least as a first version still good enough. But obviously we want to get our hands on some of the images. And so if, for example, we start reaching out to, say, people who list on our site and ask them if we can use some of the images on their social media account, we should be able to create really high quality pages. Now, overall, the way I like to think of this is basically my V0. This is kind of like the first draft of it all. This doesn't have to be perfect. The key thing here is to just move fast. But now that I kind of have all of this, I've got all these different sections. Now I can start thinking about how I can make this dynamic. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create a Webflow CMS collection. Then we're going to have to identify all of the individual fields on this page that are dynamic, and then we're going to have to set up the corresponding fields inside of the CMS. Now, just to catch you back up on the last episode where I kind of, like the last video in this series where I kind of made a video on how to create these kind of pillar pages, overview pages, call it what you want. I had to create a collection for all of my different races just so I could create these preview cards. And so I actually already have my collection set up. So you can see it here under race details. And if I click into one of my race detail pages, you'll already see that some of the fields that I've added are, very much related to the card. So I've got my card title, I've got the card date, I've got the location and card thumbnail. What I want to do now is I want to create a more detail-rich page for these pages because when someone clicks on it, ideally what we want to do is take them to their version of this page here. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to now head into our pages. And whenever a new CMS collection is created, it automatically creates a template page for us. And so this is where we're going to be building our dynamic template page. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to head back to our template page, like our static page. We're going to copy it, and then we're going to head back to our template page, and we're just going to paste it in here. So now that I've pasted in here, what I can actually do is I can actually reference information that sits inside of the CMS for all of these different items and dynamically map it to some of the values on the page. Now, let me quickly show you what I mean. So let's say here we've got our title. What I can do now is I can now replace the static text with a value that sits inside of my CMS. For example, I can use the name of the event. And you'll see now how it automatically updates it on this one particular page. Now, if we go and switch between all of the other events that are going on, you can now see that we'll dynamically change the title of the event depending on the actual value that sits inside of the Webflow CMS. And that's really what makes the Webflow CMS so powerful, because what we can do now is instead of creating all of these pages individually, we can actually create one version of this page, and then we can use the Webflow CMS to essentially populate all of these different pages with dynamic content. So that brings us to the next point, which is what fields are we going to have to create inside of our CMS in order to recreate all of these sections here in a dynamic way. So the first thing is I like to start at the very top, and I like to think about what is it that each of these sections is going to do. So the All Races page is simply going to be a link that is going to navigate to the Find a Race page. So when someone clicks on here, what it will do is it will just take them straight to this page here. Let's just wait for it to load. Usually it goes a lot faster than that, but I think Webflow's having a bit of a day. There we go. So it will take you to that page. And then when someone clicks on this, the idea is that it then takes us to our template page. So let's quickly hook this up as well. So what I'm going to have to do is wrap this in a link block. Already have a link in here, so that's not going to work. So what I might do is just remove this call to action and then simply wrap it in a link block, and then I'm going to navigate them to this page here. And so that way we now have kind of the high level setup of our navigation going. I'm going to have to make some UX changes to it, but you can kind of see it will just take me to that page here. So that's what that first link is going to do. This here is going to link to a location listing page. Now I'm going to dive into a CMS listing pages in the future, but what this is going to be is a single reference field that we're going to need to set up inside of our CMS that is going to link to a location page. The same thing is going to apply to this link here. This is going to link to a race type specific page, but for you, it might be something like a category or a tag or whatever it may be. And once again, this is going to be a single reference. Now, if we go and have a look at sites like Airbnb, usually you'll have a tendency to see directories do this. Maybe, oh yeah, here we go, down here. So they've got Airbnb, Canada, they've got the region, and then they've got the sub-region. But ultimately, it will just take you to something like the overview page where you'll be able to kind of navigate your way around. And so the way that we're going to do this in Webflow is by using single reference field. This link here is actually just going to be a link for the current page. So I'm just going to link that in here. The reason why you might still want to link it is just you don't want to have empty links in here. Plus you can add some styling if it's the current link. Now, next, we've got the image section. And so really what I like to think of here is we've got two options. We've got the image field, and then we've got these 4 images here. Now with these 4 images, what we're going to do is set up a nested collection. And so basically what that means is we can basically create galleries. So instead of having to upload one image at a time, what we can do is we can create one image field for our main image and then a gallery field for all of our images. And then we can dynamically populate that. Down here, we're going to have rich text, or in this case, we might even be able to get away with just, paragraph text. This here, because we're using bulleted lists, is definitely going to be rich text. So whenever you use things like links, bulleted texts, or even subheadings, we're going to need to have that. And then down here, we've got these tags, these details. This here can just be single line text fields that we can populate. The map is what I'm currently using the native Google Maps integration, but this here is not actually going to work because you cannot dynamically populate your map with values from the CMS. So what you'll end up having to do is using something like a map box integration. I'm also pretty sure that JetBoost has a solution for this, but ultimately this is here just for a visual representation. I'm not actually going to be working on that in this video. And then the frequently asked section is what we're going to call a multi-reference list. And so what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be adding a field inside of our CMS where we can dynamically link frequently asked questions to our race events, and that way we can dynamically populate it with that. What else do we have? We're going to have a CTA description. We might also have a few CTA features. Now this here can be done either with you could potentially do, how would we approach this? Maybe like single line text is probably the most straightforward way of doing it. I think just for simplicity purposes, that's probably how I'd approach this. But there are also some nice little workarounds with custom scripts that allow you to populate this more dynamically without having to create a field for every single one of them. And then we have a URL. Now, I'm going to just focus on the essentials here just to kind of move things along. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go through the process of setting up my gallery images and then the rest of the things. So I'm going to head over to the CMS. So we're going to go in here, we're going to click on settings, and now we're going to dive straight into it. So the first thing that I'm going to add is a single image, and I'm simply going to call this hero image. We're going to save that. Then the next field is going to be our gallery. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to call this gallery. And this is a multi-image field. This will allow us to add multiple images to our listing. Then the next section is going to be our rich text section. And this is just going to be the race about section, just like that. And then we're going to have another rich text section, and this is going to be our, we'll just call it race benefits section for now. Then we're also, let me quickly go back. We'll save these changes. Let's go back, check out what else we have. Then we have all of our individual items in here. So I will go ahead and add some dynamic values for that. I might actually just open this up on another page so I don't have to switch back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to go and create a single line text for my location label. And in certain cases, you might already be using it. So you might already have something like location, in which case you don't need to duplicate this. It really depends on whether this will look different to how it looks on the card. But ideally, the less we use, the better. So I'm just going to go ahead and maybe I'll just leave it for now. Let's add a few more. Location label. We're then going to add race type. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the swag tag or the swag label. And because I know that all of these are just single line text, I'm just going to add them as plain text. But there are, if you have tons and tons and tons of these labels, there's actually a better way of doing this, but out of the scope of this video, so I'll address this in the future. But let's dive into here. We'll go facilities. And then last but not least, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go parking. So now that I've created those fields, I'm going to click on save the collection. And you can now see that if I click into any of these events, it's got all of these extra fields that I can now populate. Now, if you go back to your dynamic listing page, what you'll be able to do now is map these up. So for example, with the main image, would map it to the hero image. Now with the gallery, I'm actually going to have to now do something slightly different. I'm going to actually have to add a collection list in here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, I'm going to grab my collection list. It's going to drop right down there. Let's click on it just so we can find it in the navigator. And what I'm going to do is I am going to move this collection list wrapper to the section up here that's called collection list. So I kind of have already pre-built this. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop this up here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially recreate the static version of what I just created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this connection. I'm going to say, put in here my gallery multi-images. And then because I like the layout that I created on my static page, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to replicate the actual structure. So I've got listing page, and because I've already created these classes, I just need to replicate. So it's listing page list minus wrapper, boom. Then within this, I can open this up and then I've got the listing page list. So I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to go listing page underscore list. There we go. And then in here, the last thing is my listing page item. And so I'm going to go listing page underscore item. And you can call it something like gallery. It really depends on what it is that you want to do. And then in here, I can actually just replicate what I've got in here. So I've got my listing page lightbox link. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste that in here. And so for every image that gets added in here, it will now automatically dynamically create this. Now, I'm going to, for now, hide this just in case I need it in later on. But we're going to go set this to display none. And we're going to just display none it. And now it is dynamically populating the section. Now, with this particular example, the reason why we can't see anything is because no content is in there yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the edit button and I'm going to now start populating some of the content so that we can kind of see what it looks like when it is populated with information. Okay, and so there we go. We can now see how the images are dynamically populated. Now, again, understanding how to set up each section will really just come over time. Webflow has some really good documentation of it. I kind of go over every single type of section in the local directory playbook as well. But essentially, all you need to do is map all the content out, then select the highlighted section that you want to have dynamic, and then map them up with the corresponding fields inside the CMS. Now, in this case, because I have actually created the about section as a rich text field, what I'm actually going to have to do is replace this paragraph field with a rich text component, which I'm going to do here. And then in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to map this to the race about section, just like that. And once again, because it's empty, it's actually not going to show anything. But when we start populating the CMS or that specific field, I can add things like links. I can say this is a test, and I can also say things like here's a link, and I can then go ahead and add a dynamic link. And so it really depends on what you want to use a certain section for. But if you just want it set up like that, you can go and test it. You can hit the save button, and then you'll see those changes reflected inside of your site immediately. And so ultimately that's kind of what you want to do. Another thing that's really cool about the CMS here is that you can actually also just edit it directly in here. So you can, let's say we drop this in here. I don't want it to be a link, so what I'm going to do is just going to drop this in here. And now if you go and look at the Webflow CMS, you'll see how it's automatically populated that section. So for me, the next step in all of this is going to be to now just continue mapping up all the corresponding fields. So in this particular case, I've got my rich text element that I'm going to map to my race benefit section. Once again, it will go empty just simply because nothing's there. And then I'm going to add all of my tags. So I've got my location tag. So see, I didn't actually need to create that duplicate one. My expected runners label, haven't created yet. So what I might need to do is just quickly go back to the CMS, add a new label. And this is going to happen a lot, by the way. You're going to have to come back and forth and do all sorts of things. So don't stress about it if you don't have it right in the first go. I don't need that location label, so I'm just going to delete this. Then I'm going to save my collection, and then we're going to return. And now I can continue mapping things up. So the expected runners value is this here. So I'm just going to put it in here. And notice how you don't actually need to update the actual title. That will be consistent across all of the different pages. Then in here, what we're going to do is we're going to select race type. Then in here, we're going to go ahead and select our, what even is that field? Let me double check. I should check swag. All right. So it's the swag label. We're going to go in here, swag label, boom. And then aid station gets its own label as well. So I'm going to go ahead and, did I create my aid station label? Yep, there we go. Boom. Facilities. So we'll go in here, facilities, and then parking. So we're going to go ahead and do that as well. Now, this here is going to be the link. You can also get your links. So I've actually got a field in there called the sign up URL. And then you can just kind of keep going. Now, the point of this is to kind of give you the high level idea of how this all works. So I'm not going to be diving into the weeds of every single field type, only because we'll be here until tomorrow. But if you do want to learn about it, just let me know in the comments down below, what kind of sections you want to learn about, and I can kind of go from there. Like I said, with the single reference fields, what we're going to have to do, and I'm just going to show you for, say, like the locations, is we will have to create a collection, which I'm going to call, say, something like race locations. And then what I'm going to do in here is essentially create a race location. So let's say New York City. And now what you can do is this will create a dynamic template page. We'll be dealing with this in a future video. So you can kind of see here, race location page. And this is where we're going to be creating our dynamic page where we'll only show, events related to this particular city. Very good for SEO. But now that we've got that, in order for us to link the actual race, the individual races to the location, we can actually add what's called a single reference field. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to call this the location reference. And if you, for example, have like text labels like location, then what I recommend doing is just calling it reference as well. When you start working with Airtable and the API and all that type of stuff, this will become it will become very handy just having clear naming conventions. And so then I'm going to go ahead and save it. And now when I come in, I can actually just go ahead and select these. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click on Save Changes. And now that I've got this, I can now go here and I can now reference this link based on what my single reference collection is. So in this case, I can say, hey, link that link to the location reference page like that. And then of course, we're also going to have to populate the text. And so once again, we can select the location reference field inside of our table, and we can just go ahead and select the name. And it's currently empty because Webflow loves to make things complicated with their CMS. So we're just going to go ahead, queue to publish it, and then when we come back, I believe it should just show up. Maybe I have to hit the publish button first. Yeah, not the best user experience, Webflow, but hey, all good. So let me just double check that I actually add it to the right place. I don't know, maybe I'm the one who just doesn't know what he's doing. So here we go. There we go. So now you can kind of see it in here. And this is a link now. So whenever I click on it, it will take me to my listing page. And again, we'll deal with that in the future, but it's basically the equivalent of this page here. No, not this page, of the Find a Race page, but it will be more catered towards a specific location. And then you can kind of click back and forth. Again, makes for a really good user experience. Now that we've got this set up, now it's really a matter of populating your database. And so the non-complicated way of doing this is to actually just come in here and to just start populating your CMS with information. And really, it's just a matter of, just adding content. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some content in here. Boom, that looks nice. And then we'll go ahead, we'll add this, and then I'll go road, go chip times, whatever. Swag label, we'll go race bib, and I don't know what else. Maybe we'll say post race beer, aid stations every 3 kilometers. So you can kind of set like a, you can kind of write whatever it is you want. We'll just put that in here. Facilities, we'll go bag exchange, and then finally parking, we can say something like at the Empire State parking lot. I don't know. We want to put that in here. And so now basically we've dynamically populated this. Maybe I'll also add a link to my website like that. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to save the changes. And we have now got it all populated. And so really now the name of the game is to populate your database, and that will create all of these different pages with dynamic content. Now, a few more little things that I want to share before we move on to the next part in all of this is, okay, what happens if, for example, there's certain information that you can't get on a certain section? So that's a fantastic question. And we're going to start off by going over these. So the first thing that you can do is you can actually just hide a section. So let's say, for example, you can't create dynamic maps like me in this case. What I like to do is I want to keep it for later. I'm just going to create a combo class of display none, which looks like this, and then I can just hide it. That way it's not deleted. If I ever remove it in the future, I can just put it right back here and we're all good. So that's number one. The second kind of scenario that you can run into is that, for example, you can't get your hand on certain images, but other races might be able to do. So in this case, this race has images, but in this case, this race doesn't. And so we obviously don't want this section sitting here that kind of looks a little bit average. So what we can actually do is we can actually set a conditional rule where we basically check our CMS. And basically what we're saying is, hey, if the hero image is not set, then display this element. So in this case, the hero element, the hero image is actually not in here. So what we want to do is we actually want to hide the entire section, the entire list gallery section. So we're going to go in here, and we're going to say, hey, if the hero image is set, show this element. And then we're going to go ahead, save it, and because there's no image, it's not there. If, for example, we don't have a benefit section, so we're going to click on this section here. So we're going to click on the section so that it also includes the header. And basically what we say here is, hey, if there is nothing, so basically actually what we're saying is, hey, only show this section if the race benefit section is set. Basically what we're saying is, hey, only show this section if there's actually something in here to show. nothing there, so it goes. And then you can do this at an element level. So even here, you can say something like, hey, only show this if the expected runners is set. And because it's empty, it goes away. But then when I go back to my other page, where I have populated stuff, let's go in here. You can see it is all there, so because it's set, it will display all that information. And really, that is how the Webflow side of things works. Now we need to move on to the part where we start to become more efficient about getting data into these pages, and that is where Whalesync and Airtable come into play. So for the next part of this video, I'm going to actually switch to this project here. This is actually the project that I used in the local directory playbook to kind of walk you through how all of the individual steps work. But what we're going to be doing here is we're going to now move from having our database just in here like this, with all these fields populated, to having it dynamically populated from inside of Airtable. And so what we're going to have to do first is we're going to have to go and make sure that we have a Whalesync account. And I suppose you could theoretically do this with other tools as well. You could do this with like Zapier and all that kind of stuff. But I actually think when it comes to the use case of syncing, Whalesync is just the best option. It just makes it so much easier. So what you'll want to do is for every single dynamic field that you've created in here, you'll want to create an Airtable table that contains all these fields as well. So what do I mean by that? So right here, I've got a table with my race series, and every single one of these tables ultimately represents a collection inside of my CMS. And inside of each of these tables, you're going to see that I have all of the different fields set that are also represented inside of my CMS collection. So for example, I've got my race title, I've got my hero image, I've got my gallery images, I've got my about section, my location label, and basically everything else that you need here. I've got my locations, all that kind of stuff all hooked up. And then if I jump into my Airtable base, you can see here, same thing. I've got my linked record fields, which represent single reference fields. I've got my about section. I've got my race features, which is a multi-reference field that basically dynamically populates this and then ultimately creates these tags here. And so what we want to do now is really go through the process of saying, okay, what are the different fields that I have in here, and recreate that inside of Airtable. And so ultimately the final version of this should really be something like this. Now, you might have additional fields in here that you might not be sending to Webflow, but the most important thing is to make sure that you have all of these set up. As soon as you have all these fields set up, what we need to do is we need to set up the syncing between Airtable and Webflow so that we don't actually need to keep going back into Webflow to make changes. We can actually just do it all in here. We can basically set up our workflows to populate our database, and then once we have it in here, we can automatically sync it. And so what we're going to have to do is in Whalesync, we're going to have to create a sync. Now this here is a very simple and straightforward process. The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to map our tables. So the way it works is that you first of all connect your apps. And in fact, let me just show you how it works. So we click on New Sync. Then you go ahead and you select your apps that you're working with. So in this case, Airtable, it will ask you to authorize it. Then you move on to the next thing. You pick Webflow, it will ask you to authorize that as well. You can just go ahead, connect to your app. And then what it will do is it will then take you to the stage where you can then start mapping your tables. And so what we want to do here with our table mappings is we want to say, okay, we have inside of Airtable a table for our race series. And so that's what we've been working on in this video. And then what we can do is we can associate the race series table that we have inside of Airtable, so this one here, to our Webflow CMS collection, which is the equivalent one that you've set up. And so what we can do in Whalesync now is we can say, hey, whatever sits inside of the average finish time field in Airtable, sync that with Webflow. Same for the cart description and so on. So you can see I've basically mapped all of my fields. And what this means is that whenever a change or a record is added to Airtable, it automatically syncs that information into my race series table. And vice versa, if I make any changes to any of the CMS fields inside of Webflow, it automatically syncs those changes back into Airtable, which means you have a perfect two-way sync between the two platforms. So one additional thing that I want to show you that might be of interest and relevant is that you can also set filters. So when you're setting this up for the very first time, you can also say, hey, I only want to allow syncing for certain types of filters. And so in certain situations, you're going to have records that might not be ready to be sent to the CMS. And so what I do is by default, if I'm not ready to send it, I just add it to review mode. That allows me to kind of make whatever changes I want to make in here before I send it all through. But then as soon as I switch it to draft mode or active or archived, that's when Whalesync will recognize that the sync is ready to go. And what will happen is it will just automatically start the syncing process. Now, got to remove these two fields. I'm not sure where that came from, but all you need to do then is click on activate sync, and what happens is the syncing process will then start between all of the different tables that you've got set up. And so in the case where you'll have single references or multi-references, you can actually just create all those tables as well. And then from there, you can actually just include that into your Whalesync setup, and it will just do automatically all the syncing for you. I'm telling you right now, as someone who has used, make.com and Zapier and all those types of things, and I've also taught this to a lot of people, if you don't want headaches when it comes to the syncing process, just use this. And yes, they are the sponsor of this video, but I would pretty much say the exact same thing anyway, just because this is as simple as it gets. So that basically covers off how we then get our data from our Airtable base into Webflow. And now I'm going to give you a bonus, which is going to be to talk about how to get data into Airtable. Now, this here is... we're giving secrets away at this point, but hey, all good. We share. Sharing is caring. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that every person's directory is going to be different, depending on, whether or not businesses that you're going to list or people you're going to list have their own websites or Google My Business accounts, all those kind of things. Workflows are going to differ. Now I'm going to show you how I approached populating all this, and I basically populated it within a span of minutes. And all of this is researched, and I've got detail-rich about sections all written for me. I've got information on things like courses and basically anything that you really need, again, to create these really high-quality, rich profile pages. And there are really a few parts to all of this. Now, I talked about this briefly in my data sourcing video. Basically, what I do is I break the workflow of populating all this data into three main steps. So step number one is what I call data seeding. Step number two is called data enriching, and then step number three is called data cleaning. Now, the high level of it is data seeding is all about finding your listings. So that's step number one. And so typically what I would do to get started is I'd pick a location. So let's say, for example, Chicago, and say I want to go and find all of the running races that are happening in Chicago. So typically how I would approach it is I'd just go into Perplexity and I'd say something along the lines of, can you find me running races happening in Chicago in 2025? And then I'll go and hit the search button, and what it will do is it will then go out, it'll find a whole bunch of different sources, and it will kind of return something along these lines. Okay, it will tell me what the distances are that are available, all that kind of stuff. Now, all of this information here is perfect for a starting point for me. So this is what I refer to as seeding data. So basically, sourcing the data. And so what I want to do now is I want to now take this and I want to get it into my listing table. So I want to basically create a listing for every single one of the races that was found. And so the way I do that is I set up a make.com workflow where I basically fire a webhook from inside of Airtable. So basically I say something along the lines of, hey, in my race location table, go and find me all of the races in say, for example, New York City. And what it does is the automation fires it, sends it to make.com. It then goes ahead and it retrieves the location record from my Airtable base, and it will know which one to retrieve because with the webhook, I'm also passing through the record ID that I selected when I started this workflow. Then what it will do is it will run a Perplexity prompt, and this Perplexity prompt is essentially what I just showed you in here. I basically ask it a question, and with this workflow, I'm actually dynamically populating the value of the location with whatever I retrieved from Airtable. Then from here, because I'm actually going to get something that looks a little bit like this, I can't actually store this as a record inside of Airtable. So what I end up doing here is I end up getting the response that I get from Perplexity, and I basically format it in a way that allows me to then store it inside of Airtable. And so what I do is I basically say, hey, this is the information that I'm looking for. I also give some specific instructions on how I want the response formatted, and then I also return it in JSON format. And then what I do is, because I'm getting maybe like 5 to 10 individual listings at a time, what I do is I iterate through each one, and then I basically create the listing, and then I basically update it from here. So if I go and show you this in real life, let's go and what's a location that I don't have in here? Let's say, I can't think right now. Let's say, what is it? We've got San Jose, we've got, now I'm kind of stuck on locations. Okay, you know what? Don't worry about it. What I will do is I will just go ahead and actually let's just think about this a little second. Why can I not think of anything? Okay, you know what? I'm just going to do this for a state, Michigan. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add this in here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to say find events, triggers the workflow, and then it will start this workflow in here. Hopefully I've got this turned on. Just got to double check. Okay, so we should be good. Yep, here we go. So it kind of finds the record ID, retrieves the record, which is Michigan, goes ahead, makes the Perplexity prompt to basically go ahead and do research into all the running races that are happening in Michigan. It will return it as a big text block, and then it will start populating my database with these listings. So let's just give it a quick little second. By the way, these workflows that I'm showing you here, you'll be able to copy and paste in the local directory playbook. It's all part of it. Okay, so we got our response. So if we go and have a little look into this, you can kind of see it will give you something along these lines. Because of the model that I'm using, it also uses all my research, but there you go. It kind of shows me something like this. Then it does the formatting, goes through the process, creates 14 events. And then if I go back to my race table, I should see a whole bunch of new ones added in here. Look, there we go. It tells me the city, location, it's populated it with the name, all that kind of stuff. So pretty awesome. Now, the thing now is that there's still tons of information missing from here. For example, race features, course type, all that kind of stuff. And that's what then brings me to the next part, which is data enriching. Now, the data enrichment workflow actually works very similar to the data seeding. However, the main difference is that we're not doing research into multiple listings. We're actually doing deeper research into an individual listing. And so what we want to do is we basically want to dive deep into one of these events. Okay, so we want to find out, hey, where is this? What are we doing? All that kind of stuff. And so in here, I want to be able to, populate my database with, say, things like the about section, the course type, whatever it may be, like, what races are going on, that kind of stuff. Now, there are multiple different ways that you can enrich your data. You can also set up a workflow to kind of retrieve information from their Google My Business account, from their Instagram account. But in certain circumstances, there'll be certain businesses that just don't have that type of information. So what I like to do is just for the research of individual listings is I like to just set up a Perplexity research like this. And so what I do is I basically jump in here and I basically say, all right, what is an interesting one? Let's say, let's say this one. No, let's take one of the Michigan ones. Let's say the do not stop half marathon. What I do is I go and say, okay, go ahead, enrich data. And what this means is really do your research. And so once again, fires the webhook, retrieves the listing. So it says, hey, here's the do not stop half marathon. It will also provide some additional information on things. And the way that you write your prompt here is super important, because if you, miss out important details, what ends up happening is that it will essentially find wrong information and you'll never know. So really what I pass through is things like, the name of the event, where it's at, what date it's on. That way it's like dead certain that it knows where it is. And then what it does is it goes and finds the record. Once again, I then get it to basically take that research that was generated and break it into individual strings. So I've got, the race about, I've got the course details, highlights, amenities, all those kind of things. And then what I do is I just store it in here. And so now you can see I've got all this information just populated in here. Then I've got, certain course information sections, even though in this case it didn't return anything, so you'll probably have to remove it. But then it's got things like, highlights, a free donut awaits finishes, all that kind of stuff. And then I also store all of the research that happened, just so that if I need to basically, update any of the information, I actually have this as a reference point as well. And then that brings us to the last part, which is data cleaning. Now, obviously, I'd probably still have to do quite a few more things, like retrieving certain types of images, that kind of stuff. And there are some really great workflows that you can set up to basically do all of that. But just for the sake of time, what I would want to do next is basically make sure that I can format all of the data so that then when I turn it on and it starts syncing in Whalesync, the data automatically transfers over to Webflow in a way that actually works with my existing setup. Because if, for example, I have a field here which is like the CTA button text, and it instead gives me 5 links, then obviously it's not going to look good. So what I want to do is I just want to basically explain how I want each section to be formatted before it gets sent over. And then what my data cleaning step does is it basically goes through that process of making sure that the actual data is formatted in a way that works. So let's dive into that. So here's the setup that I got for this particular workflow, just to illustrate it. But really, this is just what I'm using. I mean, everyone else's setup is going to be so vastly different because of the use case and their specific setup. But all I need to do then is just go ahead and click on clean data. And once again, what it will do, webhook will fire, it will go through each of the formatting steps, and then essentially gives me a finished version of this. And then all I need to do is just click it to active, and then the syncing process starts and we're good to go. Now, tons of additional workflows that support all of this. Obviously, I have no images in here right now, all that kind of stuff. But you can hopefully see that, when it comes to setting up really like nice, high quality data rich pages, there are ways to do it without, having to spend hours scouring the internet. So I hope you found this useful. This was a very long one because people keep asking me for the more in-depth video. So if you did find this useful, please smash the like button, hit the subscribe button. If you want to learn more about this stuff, jump on over to the local directory playbook landing page, where I'm going to show you this and tons more. Other than that, thank you so much for watching the entire video, and I'll see you back here for the next one.